Shri Tarun Bajaj, Secretary, Department of Revenue, Government of India. Shri Vivek Johri, Chairman, Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, CBIC. Members of this audience, this distinguished gathering which is present here. I can see many officers from both CBIC and CBDT, from Government of Maharashtra, from the media and from the market, from the private sector and business. Many of you are known faces. So it's indeed a great pleasure for me to address such an august gathering here today. I have, as was mentioned by the Chairman CBIC and Revenue Secretary, I have worked very closely with both of them when I was in the Finance Ministry, with many of the officers from CBIC and CBDT. We have worked very closely and it's really nice to see you once again. I can also see many private sector players and known faces, members of my friends from media who are also here. And I thank the CBIC for having organized this event to celebrate the iconic week of the Azadi ka Amrit Mahotsav. The monetary policy meeting announcement was made yesterday, so I would not be really in a position to talk on issues which touch monetary policy. That is because as per the rules, and Secretary Revenue knows very well, he was Secretary Economic Affairs earlier also, there is a silent period of 1 week. Silent period so far as monetary policy and the related issues are concerned, but not silent period in respect of other issues. I have therefore chosen for my address a topic, namely Indian business, past, present and future, which I felt will resonate with the audience here given its composition. And before I proceed, I must also I would like to congratulate all the officials of CBIC, CBDT, the Chairman CBIC who is present here, and above all the Revenue Secretary for the excellent revenue collections which have been done last year. So my very best appreciations and congratulations to the entire Revenue Department. It was a tough year. Having been in the Finance Ministry and particularly in Revenue Department, I am aware how difficult it is to get all those revenues which you have, and not just get the revenues, but having exceeded the target and having shown such exceptional growth in a very, very turbulent and difficult year. So congratulations. Let me now come to the topic. Now, businesses form the bedrock of an economy, and on an occasion like this, it will be worthwhile to look at Indian business and how it has evolved over the years. The current context of transformative changes that are altering the business landscape and ecosystem in India also was another reason for me to choose this topic today. Now, I have structured my talk broadly into 3 parts. In the first part, I would like to touch upon the historical evolution of Indian businesses over the years, and what kind of lessons which can be drawn from there. I then propose to turn to the current scenario, where I propose to highlight the tremendous opportunities that are available today, of course highlighting the challenges that we are confronted with. And third aspect, I also propose to highlight certain aspects and the criticality of issues like corporate governance and related issues, which are indispensable and essential requirements for any business to succeed and to have its sustainability. Historically, businesses have been the creators of wealth by bringing innovation in production and trading activities, which facilitated higher productivity and ensured and facilitated better standard of living for the people. Apart from creating growth and employment opportunities, businesses are also big contributors to the tax revenues of the government at all points of time, which eventually go to support the various developmental and welfare measures which the government undertakes from time to time. So in that sense, both from growth and welfare standpoints, businesses play a critical role in the overall economic development of the country. In the words of T.S. Eliot, who needs no introduction, only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. The underlying theme of business is to explore opportunities, take risks, and capitalize upon them. In India, business and entrepreneurship have always had special place in our society. The history of Indian business is a fascinating story and one that is closely intertwined with political and economic history of our country. Traditionally, Indian businesses were rooted in local knowledge and resources that were greatly admired all over the world. During the colonial period, however, our businesses were faced with existential challenges primarily due to the policies adopted by the colonial government. However, showing resilience and capacity to innovate and improvise, Indian business has over the years not only survived but is now well positioned to take India's growth story forward. Indeed, this could just be the moment of India's arrival as a global growth driver. The history of Indian business is fairly long. I don't want to take too much of time on this. India was a key hub of scientific innovation from its early history, which lent India a position of leadership or a pole position in several areas like medicines, mathematics, astronomy, and metallurgy. During the medieval period, India was a prominent economy having trade relations with the rest of the world. India was central to the Silk Route and the Cotton Road. India's indigenous craftsmanship was world-renowned. In 1700 AD, India's share in the world GDP was 24.4%, ahead of China's share of 22.3%. Even so, large-scale domestic business was restricted because of the fragmented nature of political landscape coupled with infrastructural bottlenecks which prevailed at that time. While trading and money lending were hallmark of business, manufacturing, which was primarily small scale, was largely left to the artisans. In short, trade was the face of Indian business alongside a flourishing banking and exchange business which was offered by the merchants. The advent of imperial powers, that's I'm now moving to the colonial period, the advent of imperial powers and the discovery of new trading routes completely changed the face of Indian business during the colonial period. The onset of the Industrial Revolution in late 18th century England had catapulted that country, that is England, into a position of leadership in industrial power. British tariff policy, and this was very important for India's growth thereafter, British tariff policy encouraged exports of raw materials to the detriment of India's domestic industrial development and local enterprise. A Reserve Bank of India survey, which was conducted in 1948, estimated that of all foreign capital invested in India, only 28% was in the manufacturing industry, whereas 37% was invested in merchandising and transport, and 20% in tea, coffee, and rubber plantations. Very clearly, the thrust was to promote British interests to the detriment of India's interests. Despite such adverse circumstances, Indian business managed to hold its own amidst the nationalistic fervor of that time. With British industrial power on a decline due to war preoccupations, several industries in India in the sectors like textiles, jute, iron, and steel, and also paper and cement consolidated their position. Considering the stagnation in the previous decades, the post-World War I spurt in industrial activity in India was significant. Notably, Indian businessmen also remained alive to socio-political atmosphere of the time by pursuing and propagating the nationalistic agenda. In the aftermath of independence, that is, in the initial decades after independence, we saw changes to India's business environment with economic policy primarily focused towards capital-intensive production structure. Indian businesses were unshackled from the confines and constraints of the colonial government that reduced them to be just raw material producers and suppliers. In the subsequent period, however, shocks such as wars of 1962, 65 and 1971, droughts of 1965 to 1966, and the OPEC oil crisis of 1973 revealed the underlying vulnerabilities of the Indian economy. In hindsight, excessive regulations stifled entrepreneurial growth and led to inefficiencies that reflected in the macroeconomic imbalances of that period. As a result, a new vision of political economy driven by markets and private enterprise started to evolve steadily. In the 1980s, the open general license list for imports was expanded, industrial controls were somewhat eased, limited external borrowings were allowed, and an early version of indirect tax reforms began. The external payments crisis as we entered the 1990s culminated in the path-breaking economic reforms of 1991. The economic reforms of the 1990s were wide-ranging and were essentially based on the trinity of liberalization, privatization, and globalization. They entailed deregulation, end of the license permit Raj, increased outward orientation, and willingness to let market forces play their role. The financial system and the external sector also underwent fundamental reforms relating to strengthening of prudential norms and supervisory system, operational flexibility of the banking sector, taxes and tariffs, exchange rate and capital flows. The reforms aimed to bring in competition to promote efficient markets that deliver growth, create wealth, and contribute in reducing poverty. In the years since the initiation of economic reforms, that is I'm now looking at the span post 1991 till now. In the years since the initiation of economic reforms, Indian business has witnessed various transformational changes in several sectors spanning information technology, telecom, pharmaceuticals, automobiles, hotels, textiles, engineering goods, and entertainment. Our businesses have created global reputation. Indian business entities have shown a great deal of flexibility in an environment of rapid technological changes. This has led to a shortening of product life cycles and innovation and technology, which have become the key sources of our competitive strength. The country now commands a diversified industrial base that has shown resilience in the face of multiple challenges posed by shocks such as the global financial crisis, the recent COVID-19 pandemic, and now the war in Europe and its fallout. The last few years have seen several policy measures and reforms that have created conducive conditions for Indian businesses to grow more rapidly. A mention was made about GST, and that I will be touching upon it briefly in the subsequent part. But I can say that, I was fortunate to be in the Revenue Department as Revenue Secretary when the Constitution Amendment for introduction of GST was carried out. And I am privy to, I had a ringside view, or rather I was very much within the ring with the top functionaries, the finance minister and others in the government. And I was a close, I was a close witness of how it was evolving and what all we had to do. And I made my own little contribution to the own process. So today when I see and when I hear that the revenue collections under GST have really increased, and we have now reached 130 or 135 crore, 167, sorry, that was the highest, this thing, that is 1.67 lakh crores, isn't it? 1.67 lakh crores per month collection. It gives really a great amount of satisfaction. And it shows the kind of administrative and procedural streamlining that has taken place. It also demonstrates the inherent strength of a tax system like GST, which reduces cascading effect and which optimizes business returns. It's beneficial to business. It's also eventually beneficial to the governments, both at the center and at their states. Now, the past few years have seen several policy measures and reforms that have created conducive conditions for Indian business to grow more rapidly. There has been a clear focus on improving ease of doing business, simplifying procedures both in direct and indirect taxes and in other regulatory areas and other areas which lie in the domain of the government and the relevant regulators. We have also seen positioning of incentives to enable businesses and industry to take a quantum leap. The Make in India and the Production Link Incentive, that is the PLI schemes, aim to establish India as a world-class manufacturing center. The historic reform of goods and services tax unified various central and state tax laws and provided relief to businesses from cascading of taxes. Despite initial teething troubles, the new system has removed tax barriers across states and created a single common market, thereby facilitating free flow of goods and bringing efficiency gains across the sectors. The experience of GST in many countries was different. In many countries, the stabilization of the GST system has taken longer. We have cases of countries which introduced GST and then withdrew it because of the administrative difficulties and other challenges which perhaps they were not able to deal with, and maybe due to other internal reasons about which we are not aware. So, Revenue Secretary mentioned that we are going to reach 5 years of implementation and introduction of GST. I think this is a big moment for the Revenue Department, for CBIC, and for all the officials. This is really going to be a historic occasion when, on 1st July, when GST completes its 5 years. And looking back, I think India's experience has been far better in bringing in the efficiencies of GST compared to several other countries. Talking about, again, coming back to reforms, we find that many states, that a few states have rationalized labor laws to simplify procedures and ease restrictions of entry and exit. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, that is IBC of 2016, is in fact a groundbreaking reform to help time-bound resolution of stressed assets that will free up scarce capital to drive growth. To bridge the infrastructure deficit, several measures including the National Infrastructure Pipeline, the National Monetization Plan Pipeline, and the PM Gati Shakti have been taken up. All these measures are expected to create a conducive business ecosystem in India. Policy actions taken by the government and the Reserve Bank of India since the onset of the pandemic in early 2020 have mitigated the disruptive effects of pandemic while restoring market confidence and ensuring quick revival of activity in the economy. Alongside, businesses are going through a redefining phase and are adapting to new realities emerging from the pandemic. Adoption of digital technologies and artificial intelligence is getting accelerated across firms and business sectors. These disruptive technologies offer opportunities to young entrepreneurs to create their own niche in markets dominated by the incumbents. A reflection of this is seen in the emergence of several startups in the Indian business landscape as young entrepreneurs experiment with ideas in digital payments, online retail, on-demand delivery, education, software, and much more. The number of unicorns or new businesses valued at over $1 billion is rising very fast. These startups are supported by a new ecosystem of angel and venture funding, incubators and accelerators, as well as new patterns of consumption in the society. A few words of unsolicited advice to these young entrepreneurs and startups. They should constantly evaluate the buildup of risks and vulnerabilities in their businesses. I recognize that many of them may already be doing it and that risk taking is a part of their business model. But nonetheless, these are things which should always be kept at the back of one's mind for long-term sustainability of any business. Now we are in a situation where it has become imperative even for well-established firms to adopt technology solutions if they wish to remain competitive. The advent of new technologies is fundamentally changing all aspects of business, and decision making is increasingly supported by insights from data analytics, artificial intelligence, and deep learning. Now there is almost a real-time assessment of customer needs, innovations, and market trends that is helping manufacturers to manage production capacities, save costs, reduce risks, and meet the evolving customer needs more quickly. We are in the age of data-driven smart manufacturing. If Indian business aspires to remain competitive and attain world-class status, it is important that they gear up to make the right investments sooner than later. I believe the pandemic-induced changes in strategy, in management, in operations, and in business priorities are going to stay. Therefore, the success of Indian entrepreneurs will depend on how quickly and efficiently they are able to make necessary adjustments in their business models to the new reality and to the constantly changing ecosystem all around. I would now like to focus a little bit on corporate. Is it okay in terms of time, or am I taking too long? Okay. I would now like to touch upon a few issues like corporate governance, ethics, accounting transparency, and business models, which are extremely important for any business to be successful and to maintain long-term sustainability. First, I would like to draw your attention to the single most important aspect that determines the long-term success of a business, and that is corporate governance. The thrust of sound corporate governance is to help build an environment of trust, transparency, and accountability in business entities. These are prerequisites for fostering long-term investment, business stability, and integrity. It is important to remember that trust is the most valuable asset of a business, and good governance aims to protect and preserve that trust in the organization. Good governance entails effective and collective oversight by the board and senior management of a company or any business. This would also include control layers of risk management and internal audit. These need to be based on proper risk appetite with the purpose of inculcating appropriate risk culture. Organizational culture is extremely important in any business, and it can exert substantial influence on both ethical conduct and transparency practices. Talking about ethical conduct, I am reminded of, and I'm talking about ethical conduct in business, I am reminded of what Chief Justice of the United States, Supreme Court in 1981. The Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Potter Stewart, once stated, ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is right to do. I repeat, ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is right to do. Ethics denotes the conduct of and that is unquote. Ethics denotes the conduct of responsible professional behavior within the mission of a business by managing risks professionally and pursuing profits legitimately. It is essential that the board and senior management of any business instill a strong sense of ethics in their organization by setting up comprehensive internal code of conduct which is easily and clearly observed and continuously communicated. The strength and viability of a business entity directly draws from its organizational culture and ethics. I would now focus somewhat on a little bit on transparency in accounting. And these aspects I am highlighting because these are issues which ultimately are very critical for any successful and a business which has to really be sustainable and successful in the long term. A robust corporate governance framework would require that businesses follow prudent accounting practices and provide transparent disclosures. Sufficient information should be made available to the market participants to enable them to make informed judgments about the health and viability of a business entity. Creative and aggressive accounting techniques and policies tend to overstate the financial strength, and eventually it will be detrimental to the interest of the company. The board of directors and the audit committee should ensure that integrity of financial statements is not compromised in any manner. Entities with robust corporate governance and high transparency get rewarded by the investors with higher valuation metrics and are also able to raise capital at much cheaper cost. The Reserve Bank has mandated a host of disclosures for its regulated entities to ensure that they make full and fair disclosure of all material information in their financial statements. This would make them relevant, reliable, comparable, and transparent. And finally, let me touch upon business models. Business models and business strategies of individual entities, I feel, should be conscious choices adopted following a robust strategic discussion in the board after considering all relevant factors. In other words, it cannot be a default decision. It has to be a conscious decision after weighing all possible aspects, the upsides and downsides of any activity. Eventually, business involves risk taking. Risk has to be taken. But before taking the risk, I think the upsides and downsides will have to be carefully considered. Businesses should avoid aggressive short-term reward-seeking culture without regard for the buildup of excessive risks in the balance sheet. The common characteristics of some inappropriate business models or strategies that have come to our notice, they include inappropriate funding structure, building asset liability mismatches which are highly risky and not sustainable, unrealistic strategic assumptions, particularly excessive optimism about capabilities, growth opportunities, and market trends, which may lead to poor strategic decisions that imperil business model and its viability, and over-focus on business considerations with neglect of risk, control, and compliance systems. As I said earlier, risk-taking is the essence of doing business. What I am now emphasizing is the need to carefully weigh the upsides and downsides of every risk before embarking upon it. Let me now try and conclude. India has a long history of industrious entrepreneurs and businesses. In a sense, the evolution of Indian economy is essentially a reflection of the transformation seen in Indian businesses over the years. The story of Indian entrepreneurship is fascinating, and now we are witnessing a new generation of entrepreneurs who are the flag bearers of epochal changes in the conception, organization, and operations of businesses. In my speech today, I have attempted to highlight certain important aspects which are essential features of successful and sustainable business. At the Reserve Bank, we do recognize the role of existing as well as emerging businesses for economic progress. Long-term success of any business is directly linked to its quality of governance, internal control systems, and the robustness of its risk and the organizational culture. The Reserve Bank has been pushing for improvements in the governance and compliance culture of its regulated entities like banks, NBFCs, and other financial entities through a series of measures. And in the last 3 years, we have taken measures like we have issued guidelines for governance in banks, both public and private sector. We have completely reworked and we have a new framework for NBFCs. We have a new regulatory framework for the MFIs, and we are now working on a new framework for the urban cooperative banks. With regard to lending by digital platforms, that is work in progress, and I think very soon we will be coming out with a broad regulatory architecture which should be able to address the challenges that we are confronted with regard to lending through digital platforms, many of which are unauthorized, unregistered, and should I say illegal. Indian business is now at a critical juncture with both opportunities and challenges. The macroeconomic and geopolitical environment is fast changing, and there is a greater need to remain alert. I am confident of our dynamic entrepreneurs having ample capacity to deal with these challenges and capitalize on the opportunities. Let me end by recalling what Steve Jobs, and he needs no introduction. Let me end by recalling what Steve Jobs said about the role of perseverance in success. If you really look closely, most overnight successes took a long time. My best wishes to all of you on this great occasion of the iconic week of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. Thank you. Stay well. Stay safe. Namaskar.